Hello everyone, and welcome to another very nice game from the chess.com's Computer Chess Championship. It's a rapid game played between Leela Chess 0 and Shredder 13. That sounds kind of nice, kind of like Android 13, but you know, that plays chess. I'm sure you'll agree, okay, the title of the video might be a bit overreaching. But you'll see what I mean by it. It's very impressive, and I'm sure there's like a very reasonable explanation. Someone who's into self-learning AIs might be able to explain it, but I will talk about it a bit more after we get to that part. And I didn't do any videos yesterday. I was really busy. We were picking grapes, you know, because all that wine is not going to make itself. And we do have a couple of nice photos from the grape picking event. There you have, that's me. With my father and some friends in the back. So I do hope you enjoyed that. And also here is a photo of everyone who participated in this event. It's very hard to take a photo of everyone not blinking, but you know, most of the people are facing forward, and it's a very nice photo of friends and family. So hope you enjoyed that as well. Now let's check out this very nice game. Leela has the white pieces, and she opens with d4. We have d5, c4, e6, knight to f3, knight to f6, so the queen's gambit declined is on the board. Knight to c3, and now d captures on c4. We have e4, and now bishop to b4, simply pinning the knight, developing the bishop. A very nice move. Bishop to g5 by Leela, very principled decision, you know, putting your piece as far into your opponent's camp as possible. We have c5, attacking white's strong center, and now bishop captures on c4. C captures on d4, knight captures on d4, and the bishop captures on c3. B captures on c3, and here queen to a5. Attacking the isolated c3 pawn, and white plays bishop to b5 check. A very nice move, and black has a couple of options of dealing with this bishop to b5 check. For example, you could play knight f to d7, which is sometimes this is actually a good response in bishop to b5 check. Like there are variations of the Benoni where you can go knight, the knight that was already developed to d7 instead of developing the other knight. But here it's just not so great. You could also block with this knight, for example, knight bd7, and allow something like bishop captures, queen captures on c3 check, king f1, and captures on f6. And although you would get a semi-open g file, perhaps you could use this to attack the white king, but white actually has a lot of development here, and black king also isn't feeling very safe in the center. So instead, bishop to d7, developing a piece, offering an exchange so black can further develop. Bishop captures on f6 first, and here we have g captures on f6 that was played in the game. Queen captures on c3 with check, also possible, but not really favorable for black. For example, king to f1 check, and now after captures you get knight captures, and now the queen isn't positioned so well on c3. The knight is attacking the queen is already threatening checkmate on d8, and there's really no good way to deal with this. You have to capture the bishop and allow knight to c7 check, and you have to lose the exchange here. If you don't, there's really nothing to play here. You can go queen c8 to prevent both threats, because then you get knight to d6 and you lose the queen due to the fork. So you have to allow captures, check, king f8, and now you will be simply winning this game as white. So after bishop captures on f6, we have g captures on f6, leaving the c3 pawn as it is, and now bishop captures on d7. Knight captures on d7, and here Leela simply castles. So what's the idea? Can you grab the pawn here? Well, not really. You don't want to allow knight b5, and here, of course, the queen now has to stand the c-file, or knight c7 is still an idea. Knight to d6 check is most likely white's next move, so not really. After castles, we have queen to e5, a very nice centralizing move by the black queen. It's white to play. So what do you do here? Rook to b1, simply developing the rook. Also, this comes with a nice attack against the b7 pawn. And here you have to ask yourself, can I capture the e4 pawn and also while I capture the e4 pawn, I'm going to be protecting the b7 pawn. It's not really possible. If queen captures, then you get a rook to e1. The queen is under attack. You move the queen, you get rook to b5. White already has so much activity for this one pawn. Let's say knight to c5, you block, you get c4. Queen moves, and now comes this very unpleasant knight captures on d6, opening up a discovered attack towards the black queen. Queen captures, and now knight to c7 first. King moves, now rook captures queen with check. King captures, and now rook captures on c5 with check. King to b6, and now rook to f5, and black's doubled f pawn will be really a liability, because you will lose the f6 pawn. This will come with check, and then white is already up a pawn, and black's rooks are still to be developed. So white would very much enjoy this position. So after rook to b1, knight to c5, a very nice move. Brings in another attacker against the e4 pawn. Also, the knight now guards the b7 pawn, and it's a very nice square for the black knight, because as you can see, white has no b pawn and white has no d pawn, so you can't use any pawns to dislodge the knight from c5. Rook to b4. This is really a beautiful move by Leela. What's the idea behind it? Well, you still can't capture the e4 pawn, not really. If you play knight captures, then you get... it's actually a very nice idea, but you can feel free to pause the video here and find why you can't play knight captures on e4. Just, punish black in this position. I'll give you a couple of seconds for you to decide, as usual. For those of you who were able to do it, congratulations. You are an excellent punisher of bad moves. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, queen to a4 check simply brings... creates this nice battery here against the knight on e4, and after black moves, you get knight captures on e6. This knight captures on e6 is pretty much the idea in all of these variations. F captures, and now simply rook captures on e4. Queen moves, and now queen checks. King moves, queen captures on b7. King comes to g6. And now you have a position where you have a king on g6. That's pretty much self-explanatory. So after rook to b4, knight captures doesn't work. Does queen captures work? Not really. Then you get knight captures on e6 immediately. And now, of course, you cannot capture with the queen, because rook to e1 would win your queen, and your queen is already under attack. So you have to move the queen. Let's say queen to c6, and now you get knight captures on c5. Queen captures, rook to e1 check. King to f8, and queen to d7 already. There are so many threats here. This rook can either capture and cause problems here. It can come to g4, and then you would completely control the g and the e file. It's too much to handle for black. So after this rook to b4, which is a very nice move, we have castles by Shredder. Rook to e1, developing the rook, and now rook f to d8. Black also wants to develop the rooks. Rook to e3. A nice rook lift. You do have to bring it into the attack at some point, and now comes rook a to c8. Also now introducing another attacker against the weak c3 pawn, but white already played a move to defend it. And also all of black's pieces are now developed. We have queen to g4 check, queen to g5 blocking, and Leela decides not to trade queens just yet. Queen to e2, and now comes king to h8. Black could perhaps use the semi-open g file for attack now, as, pretty much the dust seems to have settled. G3, a preemptive strike against rook to g8. We have e5 now, kicking away this powerful knight, and now comes h4, a nice Zwischenzug before reacting to this threat. Queen to g6, and now comes knight to f5. Black does have an excellent square for the knight on c5, but white now has an excellent square for the knight also on f5. Here we have rook to c7. Guarding the b7 pawn, and now comes rook to c4. So now the knight can't really move, as the rook would be hanging on c7. Black plays b6. Defending the knight, now the rook can move. Perhaps rook to d7 is an idea. Black might want to double rooks on the d file. And here we have the critical moment of the game. Here, really pause the video and try to figure out what you would play here with the white pieces, as it's very essential to this video and to the whole title of the video and everything. So, there is no killer move here or anything, but, just try to figure out what you would play here. For those of you who were able to do it, congratulations. You really have nice imagination. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, here you could play something like king to g2, for example, improve the position of the king, and then see what black will play, and then so on and then so on. But Leela actually played rook captures on c5, and this is a very how would I say it? It really shows imagination, because what you want to do is definitely, of course, you see that the queen is guarding h5. So at some point you do want to push h5 and h6. But if this pawn comes to h6, then perhaps, I don't know, you will weaken the g5 square. Perhaps this knight can then come at some point to e6 to g5, and from there it will be actually a great attacking piece against white. So what Leela did here, she saw that after rook captures, what was played in the game, and rook captures, now you have to ask yourselves, where is the compensation here? Why is this exchange sacrifice so good? It's so good because black's rooks are not very useful here. First h5, now you see the idea. Queen comes to g8, and now comes rook to d3. So not only did Leela sacrifice the exchange, but she also wants to get rid of the other pair of rooks, because this knight on f5 will be nothing on the board will be able to challenge it. It's simply a monstrosity, and it's much better than a rook. So queen to f8, a waiting move, just, you know, hoping white will capture, and then black might control the d file. First h6. Leela simply improves the position. So now you see this idea of having a beautiful knight on f5 and this pawn on h6 is now much stronger without there actually being a dark knight on the board. Rook c to c8. We have rook to d5 now. And here also perhaps a nice critical moment in the game for both white and black. Because here, of course, it seems like black can capture the c3 pawn. But then the position doesn't seem very favorable for black. For example, queen to g4, whatever black plays, let's say rook to c8, there really isn't much to do here. Queen h4, you can threaten the f6 pawn here, and it's pretty much not, I don't know, it's not a great position for black. Of course, you will never capture on d5. If you capture on d5, then you simply give white a nice passed pawn, which will be supported by the knight from f5. So here, let's say rook to c6, guarding the pawn, and to me, it's not clear how white or black would make progress here, but I'm pretty sure Leela would find a way, as Shredder decided not to capture the c3 pawn. But pretty much black doesn't really have a useful move here. You can never really do anything with the queen. Ideas like queen g4 followed by queen g7 will be an idea. You constantly have to keep an eye on the weak f6 pawn. So it's simply a much better position for white, regardless of white being down material. But Shredder trusts Leela and decides not to capture the c3 pawn. Rather, he plays rook captures on d5. And now, when you see e captures on d5, now you see that this pawn now became a passed pawn, and it can at some point be even a protected passed pawn. So what do you do here? Again, rook captures on c3. Shredder decides not to capture this pawn for some reason. Probably thinking it's not going to be anything to do with the game. I really don't know. And instead goes rook to a3. I might have forgotten to mention this. Leela is still rated around 3,300, and Shredder, I believe, is somewhere around 3,100. So it's definitely all of the moves are great moves, but for some reason decides not to capture the c3 pawn. And okay, queen to a3. We have queen to h5, now attacking the f7 pawn, and here we have rook to f8. So now the rook is stuck here guarding the position, and black managed to activate the queen. Moves like queen g4 are not very useful. The rook can always block this with rook to g8. So we have queen to f3, guarding the c3 pawn. Queen to c1 check, king moves to g2, and now comes queen to g5. So this was black's idea. Put the rook in the back to keep an eye on this f7 pawn and on the back rank, and via this maneuver, queen to a3 to c1 to g5, black managed to take advantage of white weakening the g5 square. So very nice. But here comes c4, and now Leela has a protected d pawn, a protected pass pawn, and now this is definitely a game changer. We have rook to d8, now trying to develop, to bring the other rook into the game as well. And now comes d6. The knight is very much alive here and guarding the passed pawn. So now you have a passed d pawn, you have a beautiful pawn on h6, a defended knight on f5, and I'm sure everyone will agree that this is now a much stronger piece than this rook on d8. Queen to g6. Black can only wait and see what happens. We have a4. Queen to g5, and now comes a5, trying to create another weakness on the queen side. It's often a principle that one weakness is not enough to win the game. You often have to create a second weakness, and then black will be overwhelmed. Queen to g6. Black, of course, doesn't want to capture on a5, even though it wins material, but then white gets a second pass pawn. Queen to e4. We have queen back to g5. Black can simply wait to see what happens, and now queen to b1. And now you have this beautiful position where there's really not all that much to do for black. We have rook to b8, now defending the b6 pawn, but now comes c5, and now of course you can't even capture this soon to be another pass pawn because it's pinned. The rook on b8 is undefended, and look at the harmony between white's pieces and pawns. The queen from b1 it's simply a monster. Controlling the b file you can't capture because the queen would capture the rook. The queen is also guarding the knight on f5 that guards the d6 pawn. Okay, now the d6 pawn is also guarded by the c5 pawn, but the knight also guards the h6 pawn, so everything is perfect in white's camp. This is something not often seen. b5. Now black has a pass pawn of its own, but simply not enough, because here comes c6. Now when you see two connected pass pawns on the 6th rank, you know that the game is over. Queen to d2 was played, now comes queen e4. We have rook to f8, black can only wait and see what happens. c7, we have queen to d1, and now comes queen to c6, preparing to push the other pawn, and the queen is on a nice light square diagonal, so no checks can be given here. e4, simply trying something. Of course, now queen to f3 wouldn't be very favorable for white, so first queen captures on e4, rook to g8, and now comes queen to d4. We have queen captures, knight captures, and now f5. Black is just making nonsense moves, and probably they are trained not to resign. d7, we have f4, simply bring a queen into the game. Even f3 is played here. Knight captures, now comes f6. Queen captures on f6 with check, rook has to block only move, and now comes queen captures on g7, and we have a nice checkmate against Shredder 13, rated somewhere around 3100. So yeah, a beautiful game, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, and that the title wasn't too much, but really when you look at the position, and if you pause the video, then I'm sure all of you had your doubts, but here, after this b6 move was played, you really have to see that the knight on f5 is simply a monster knight, that this pawn does have huge potential of coming here, and probably the reasoning behind this move is that any other move doesn't allow Leela to play for the win. And by playing rook captures, and not pawn captures, of course, you don't want to do that, and rook captures, you're not worse. You have a monster knight. I mean, the potential of the position is huge here, and perhaps that's why Leela did it. But I'm sure some of my viewers are familiar with self-learning AI's techniques of making decisions, so maybe you can shed some light on this situation. So yeah, I do hope you enjoyed the game, and especially this rook captures on c5 move. I thought it was really spectacular. And regarding the AGADMATOR quest, congratulations to all of you who were able to complete it. Here is a short overview of my Twitter feed. I searched for the hashtag AGADMATOR quest, so there you can see how many of you were actually able to complete it, and the list is like really huge. Those of you who have completed it like really quickly, I tried to congratulate everyone and to retweet your tweets and everything, but really so many of you have managed to complete the AGADMATOR quest, so I'm very impressed by that, and the list keeps loading. simply so many of you have managed to complete the quest. So I don't know, perhaps the quest was too easy for you. So now I hope you're ready for the second quest, and as usual, well, not as usual because this is only the second quest you will be given, but you know, the guide to the quest will be in the description below. And it's basically the same thing, only this time you have to win like Svetozar Gligoric without wasting any pieces. So you can waste pawns, but you cannot waste any pieces. So all the pieces have to stay on the board. Use the same technique, hashtag AGADMATOR quest, and you know, we'll see how you do with this one. And you know, you can try completing the quest without using the scholar mate technique in bullet games, because you know, eventually you will complete the quest by doing that. So yeah, that's the game. I would like to thank Svagat Konšada, Daniel Tebut, Kevin Wisniewski, Michael G. Raimondi, and Miroslav Jakovic for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot, I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, hopefully with some more interesting content. Thank you all, and I'll see you soon. And good luck with the quest.